That shrimp scene is iconic. Welcome to Groovy Movies. My name is Lily Austin.
And my name's James Brailsford. Hello.
Hello, and welcome back, everyone, to a new year and a new season.
We've dusted down the older podcast mics, delved back into the depths of what's out there in the cinema and streaming.
Turned on our cameras and looked at each other again after so long. I've missed you, James.
Missed you too, Lily. It's like who else do I get to nerd out in such detail about a film each week?
It's weird not having our constant stream of links back and forth and chit chat in the week. Like, you are the person I talk to the most besides my beloved. So it's been strange having a hiatus from that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But here we are, ready and raring to go.
That's right. And thank you everyone for sticking with us. I know it's been a little while since we've been on the air. As it were, on the podcast air.
and thank you for sticking with us. I know it can be a bit disruptive going off the air for a few months at a time, but we're trying to get respective new careers started. So, we try and keep this podcast going, but it's got to slot into our respective work diaries.
Yeah, it's true. But we're pleased to say that we're returning to weekly scheduling. The people have spoken.
And the algorithm has punished us.
And lessons have been learned. But it's exciting because we're taking a bit of a pivot on the format, because we've seen how much you guys enjoyed hearing us talk about the production stories of the films we've been talking about. And we love doing that. We love doing the research. We love talking about that too. So this series, we're going to focus on that. And we're going to look at a different film each episode and how it was made, what the actors were like, what nightmarish stalemates the director got into with the studio, and basically all the behind-the-scenes gossip.
Exactly. Behind-the-scenes gossip is great because it's a mixture of soap opera and tittle-tattle with actual production information of how they made an interesting film. So you get a bit of everything. Yeah,
fun trivia you can share with your friends that let them know that you know about film, but also like the juicy gossip that is actually what we want to hear about when we're talking about these movies.
All the good stuff. We have waded through it and filtered it through our respective brain boxes, and we're good to go.
Yeah, and to kick us off, we thought we'd start with one of the biggest films of 2024, and one that is tipped to do well at the awards season this year, fingers crossed, and that is, James?
That is The Substance by Coralie Fargier.
That's right. I hope everyone has seen it, and if you haven't, pause right now. Go to Mubi, watch it immediately. It's an amazing film. What do you think, James? Do you agree with me on that?
Oh yeah, I thought it was a great film. I mean, I know you said it's one of the most successful films of 2024. I think we have to be careful with the metrics. It's like, as in,
hey, I said biggest. I didn't say most successful. Biggest could mean anything. It's a vague. It's an amorphous.
You got yourself covered there. No. But I know what you mean. It's like it's the first film that's actually kind of made a bit of a cultural impact. Let's say the good old pop cultural impact. It seems to have kind of made ripples and waves.
I should clarify. It's actually Mubi's biggest film to date.
Ah, there we go. Yeah.
So Mubi is the distributor of this film. It was a working title movie, but Mubi took hold of the distribution rights even before it went to any of the film festivals earlier in 2024. And it's been a kind of a surprise mega hit. Like, I don't think they anticipated it to do so well, but yes, it's not like one of the biggest box office wise, it's not the biggest, but for a small, low budget film, it's done very well.
Oh, it's done spectacularly well. It's like back in the day, this is the kind of film hit you'd want. It hasn't made gangbusters money, but it's made its money back and it's made a profit. That's the whole point of the film industry, you know? If you're above break even, then we're all good. But, it is...
So the budget was $17.5 million and it's hit around the $75 million, which apparently with its huge advertising campaign, it may not quite break even, which just tells you how crazy it is, how much money goes into these film productions and to the marketing.
Exactly. It's the marketing and the fact that, you only get about 40 or 50% of the box office receipt back to the production company who made it, because obviously the cinema takes a cut. So, yeah, it's still got a long way to go. But it's also, I think, audience tastes have changed. Like, this is the kind of film that, very much reminds me of something like The Fly from the 1980s. These kind of body horror films, which I think had much more mainstream appeal than they do now, I think. I think you got a bigger audience turning out for body horror, like we had RoboCop, we had The Fly, and I don't know how the numbers off the top of my head, but I think they were much more in the mainstream of what Hollywood produced, where this isn't a mainstream Hollywood film. This is it's an indie film to a degree, essentially. I mean, it was made by Working Title, but
I agree that I think that Hollywood it's misunderstood what the audiences want. I think we can tell that from 2024, the number of flops there have been, because I think you're right. Hollywood doesn't really make these kinds of films right now, but actually these kinds of films do very well with audiences. Horror in general does really well with audiences, and that's the genre where smaller studios can really do well. And so, you know what? It'll be interesting to see what happens following on from this. Are we going to get bigger budget, big blockbuster body horror movies? Because there's clearly an appetite for it, in a way, because this film has this very clear kind of feminist storyline. You could argue that it's, okay, the women are 50% of the population of the world or whatever, but it's kind of, in a way, quite specific, quite niche. But clearly, people love body horror. This does resonate with people. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, it was great because it was a proper authored film. There was a clear director's vision there, and it was fascinating delving into the behind the scenes, because it reminded me very much, in a way, of A Promising Young Woman, Emerald Fennell's first film, and I felt a lot of similarities. Then when I looked into it, it's the same cinematographer, and in fact, he was chosen for The Substance by Coralie Fargier because she loved his work on Promising Young Woman, and I think you can see the kind of the connective tissue, the hyper vibrant, the saturated, almost like almost like magazine photo images that are also dark and subverted. That's very Promising Young Woman, and that's all the way through The Substance.
Yeah, wow, I didn't know that. Yeah, you can really, there is definitely a connection there.
Yeah.
And also, Coralie Fargier's debut film was called Revenge. And I have to admit, I haven't seen it, but I know it's a rape revenge thriller horror movie. So again, kind of some connection there with Promising Young Woman, that there's some relationship there, I guess. That's so interesting. But before we go any further, should we quickly do a plot summary for anyone who doesn't know what the hell we're talking about but is intrigued and wants to keep listening?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do that, yes.
When I say we, do you want to do it, James?
Oh my God, right, okay. So so the film is about the central character, Elizabeth Sparkle, played by Demi Moore. I've got your note in brackets there. We'll come back to this. But so Demi Moore plays Elizabeth Sparkle, who's you would say, if you were being unkind, an aging Hollywood star, someone who is quote unquote past their prime and is now doing very kind of Jane Fonda style exercise videos to make a living. So she's kind of aging out of Hollywood. She's made to feel like she's aging out by a lot of the male co-workers. So she goes to the hospital one day and she gets given by a nurse some kind of
very handsome nurse.
Yes, very handsome. There's some black market product called The Substance, and this apparently will help her with her aging issue. So, after a particularly bad day, she decides that, okay, she's going to go all in on The Substance, and she starts getting pulled into what this is, which is you kind of end up using a system of like food that you inject. You end up splitting in half and having a younger version of you, and you take 7 days each. You get 7 days as the younger person, 7 days as your original older person. And so the film is that dynamic playing out, basically, because they both, essentially, long story short, they both very quickly resent each other's lives and they both try and fuck each other over.
Yes, and there's like a shared consciousness. So the idea is you'll be split into two. There'll be this better version of you, younger, more attractive, best version, who's played by Margaret Qualley very, very well, I have to say. I thought she did an incredible job playing this part. But the kicker is that you have to stick to this week on, week off. You have to respect the balance, is the phrase they use. And if you don't, horrifying things ensue. And we see as Elizabeth Sparkle, when she comes back after Sue, who's played by Margaret Qualley, after Sue overstays the 7 days.
She's out partying and she wants to just kind of go crazy, have a wild life.
She's with some cute guy. And then Demi Moore's Elizabeth Sparkle wakes up and she's got this withered finger that's kind of aged, basically. That's all it is. But she's horrified by that, as you would be. And then it kind of just gets worse and worse from there. And I mean, I can't even begin to describe how kind of squelchy and visceral the sound design on this film, the look of it all.
The whole film is very stylized, which I love. You know me, I love a good style. Like, this is my favorite, the sweet spot. Like, it's heavily stylized, but there's also clearly intention behind the stylization. It's not just empty stylization, which I think it can happen quite often. This is, there's a reason why it's like this. It's a real reason why it's heightened. I remember there's an interview I read with Demi Moore who said that working on this film with Coralie Fargier, she said that she's a director who, like, the actor is not the biggest part of the process. The actor is just a part of it, which means that the actor is there to support the visuals, there to support the sound design. It's not all 100%. It's about the actor's performance. That is a part of it. So again, I'm a big fan of those kind of films. I like something where it's every part of the film was being considered. But I think you and me both, I get the impression that we're not natural fans of body horror films, because I don't really watch them that often for myself. I mean, but I love RoboCop, but they're not genres I will seek out. I will watch the good films, but like, Jesus Christ, I was looking away a lot of the time towards the last half of The Substance.
So I watched it actually at a press screening, and obviously, because it being in London, and James, you couldn't come with me, sadly, I brought one of my friends from work, and we lit the whole time. I was grabbing his shoulder, like sort of grabbing him, like looking away from the screen. And everyone in the cinema was the same. People were screaming and howling because it was a lot. Because what's fantastic about this film is it's almost completely done with special effects. What's the word I'm looking for?
Practical effects.
Yeah, so there's
lots of prosthetics and
prosthetics.
Makeup,
Thank you. Yes, there were, pretty much all prosthetics. Only a very few minor moments when they use CGI, and that is what makes it so disgusting and visceral, and you're really repulsed the whole way through, which is the whole point of the film. So actually, for me, I agree with you, James. Like, I don't want to watch body horror for the sake of it. Very rarely, but when it really is in service to the story so effectively, then I love it. And I absolutely loved it. I love this film so much.
Same here. It was like as much as I was finding it physically repulsive, the thing is, that was the point, and it worked. It was so well done, because you're right, if it had been CGI kind of prosthetics rather than real practical prosthetics, I think it wouldn't have felt as visceral, wouldn't have felt as disgusting. It would have felt a bit more cartoony. Your brain would be able to not feel revulsed, but you feel absolutely revulsed that you have to turn away, and that's the whole point of it. But yeah, that was achieved, I would say, mostly because they decided to do it with prosthetics, so it felt real and it felt tangible. So when there's lots of sticking syringes into very gross, decaying body parts, and it's just disgusting, but it looks and feels it because they actually went to the trouble of building it.
Exactly.
And what I have to say as well, massive respect for the director as well, like properly putting her money where her mouth is as far as like commitment to the film, in that she actually, the close-up shot where Demi Moore's character, where Elizabeth Sparkle injects the substance for the first time, that was actually a shot done by the director using her own arm, and she actually does inject herself because she wanted it to look and feel real. And so it actually is, obviously, something that's harmless.
I love that. And that sort of ties in a little bit with where the story came from in the first place, because for Coralie Fargier, it was basically her own life. And she's talked about how she was always conscious of her own feelings about her self-image and how violent that could be. And then actually how past her 40s and into her 50s, it got even worse. And the sense that she would be erased, she was being erased now that she was getting older. And on the one hand was like very aware how absurd this was, but also like, it is so real, and so kind of wanted to do something with that and this kind of reality of life for for most women. And I found that very interesting because you hear a lot about how the older you get, the more confident and comfortable you get and more accepting you are. And actually, that may well be the case for a lot of women, but you're probably always wrestling with these two things because, you know, our culture and especially like media and the toxicity of Hollywood also it has its impact as well. So I feel like that really comes through in the script. There's such truthfulness to it, even though nothing about, like, the film is so kind of fantastical and otherworldly in a way. You know, it really doesn't feel at all steeped in reality on like a visual level. But you really, in the script, you feel the honesty of the feelings that Demi Moore's character feels during it. You know, that scene where she's looking in the mirror and trying to put more makeup on because she's feeling anxious about going on a date. I
Good,
cried.
that scene. So good. You're just like willing her to get out the door, go on the date.
And we've all been there, right?
Stop.
Like I really, it was like so familiar to me, that feeling of like, God, I'm not feeling good. I'm not looking good. Let me just try and help. And the more you try and, you know, change your hair or change your outfit or put on more makeup, the worse you feel. And you can't pull yourself out of it. And so I loved seeing this sort of brought to life, like visually explored in this way.
Yeah, I mean, it's like with Emerald Fennell's Promising Woman. They're both exploring what could be in another film subject. They would just be very issue-based films, you know, and the film would be resolutely about that issue, and they would be perhaps more realistic, and you'd have conversations with characters that feel more grounded and real. But I think that would limit the audience appeal of it. I think by giving them like a genre feel, like one of them feels a bit like a serial killer film, we're not quite sure. The other one is like this body horror film. So we're giving it a touch of David Cronenberg. We're giving it a touch of what a mainstream Hollywood film has, but it's all at the service of exploring a theme, exploring an idea. And I think making it something that would broaden its appeal, perhaps, or just make it something that's more an experience in the cinema. That's what I love about both those films. Is they've not forgotten that no matter how serious the topic they're exploring is, give the audience an experience, make them feel something. So yeah, you feel things in both these films.
You know, I was speaking to a friend about it the other day, and she said it's such a riff on Ozempic, which I hadn't even thought about. And obviously it would have been, I'm sure the script was written or at least started being worked on before that was even something that was in the conversation. But it's amazing how, this is literally, it is like Ozempic. Like take this injection and you'll magically be a better version of yourself. But here are all these side effects. Here's the cost of it, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and never stop taking it. And you can't, like, it's you know, when you put it on, I'm like, God, it's scary because, it's actually not so far from reality, you know.
But the film as well, the whole thing has a mythical feel about it. It feels like this heightened reality also makes it feel like this is like a cautionary mythical tale, you know, because you're right, it could be specifically about Ozempic, but I think the whole idea of us aging, of us perhaps being resentful of our younger selves or not appreciating younger selves, having a relationship with a younger version of us that was almost idealized, that's universal. I think that will always be, you know, for the age. And I think it tapping into that feeling, like, you know, all the way through the film, I was thinking about these issues. I was kind of questioning. It was making me kind of consider it for the duration of the film, which is what I think these kind of things should do. Really, if you're tapping into something a little bit more mythical, you know, Elizabeth Sparkle. It's like the generic, almost Hollywood
exactly. Yeah. And then you've got Sue on the other side of it. I found it very interesting listening to an interview of Margaret Qualley talking about playing this part and how, for her own sort of mental health, it was actually a very tough part to play because she is playing the idealized woman, right? And she obviously, like, no one is that person, but she, you know, had to like do a workout regime to change her body. So it was more of this like sort of fancy idea of what a woman should be, and had to like take on this persona. You know, if you listen to her in an interview, her voice is completely different to the voice that she has in this film. And there's a lot of excitement around Demi Moore's performance, which is incredible. And it's, of any of the kind of Hollywood actors of this age category, she was the perfect one to play it because of what she went through in Hollywood herself in her younger years and even till now. But actually, I think Margaret Qualley needs to be given some kudos as well, because that is also a difficult character and complicated character to play.
Oh, yeah.
but it's because you're just, you can't, at watching her, it's like, God, she's gorgeous, you can kind of forget that. But they both, as a duo, I think they're amazing. And especially because both of them are mostly just on their own in each scene. This is a very isolated, empty film. There are barely any cast members. And most of their scenes, it's just them on their own in a bathroom or in a hallway or in an empty flat. And they really, both of them carry it equally well, I think.
Absolutely. In your notes here, you've said Demi Moore, Elizabeth Sparkle hailed as Moore's comeback, which fucks me off. Would you like to give me more background as well? Why does that fuck you off? I mean, I get it, but let's explore that because I've got some thoughts.
In this research, I saw a couple of headlines that said describing it as Demi Moore's comeback, and that just pissed me off because when people use this phrase like a comeback, they haven't actually gone anywhere. Demi Moore has carried on working her whole career. It's just that at certain points, the Hollywood system or, in the music industry, whatever it may be, just decides that they're not interested in you anymore. And then you don't get as much attention. And then so this idea of a comeback is imposed on you. And I just think that Demi Moore is one of the actors that I think has been so underappreciated and undervalued. She is an incredible actor. And because there's so much misogyny around why she isn't really recognized for the talent that she has, because she once played a stripper, which, by the way, that film, it's a bit questionable film in lots of ways. Like the script definitely could have done with some work, but her performance is top notch. But because of the character she's playing, I think she was really sidelined. Okay, I'm really getting off on a tangent, but I think she's grossly undervalued. And I'm so happy to see her in this film because it really does show her range. And there are so few words in the script. Her dialogue is sparse, and yet we really understand how she's feeling, and you really empathize with her. And it's just, I think, a really beautiful performance as well as being horrifying. And I mean, she had to be lying naked on the floor with Margaret Qualley on her like multiple times. They really ask a lot of her in this film, and she just brings it. And so I don't like it being described as a comeback because I don't believe she ever went anywhere, and I want her to be appreciated.
No, I agree with you in that. I think maybe that, in my mind, it's a comeback in the way that perhaps for John Travolta in Pulp Fiction back in the early 90s, it was a comeback for him. Is that he was always working. He didn't stop working. It's just that for whatever reason, he fell out of the public consciousness, and this was the Pulp Fiction was a thing that brought him back into like the pop culture. It was suddenly back to like the 70s where he was doing Saturday Night Fever. He did something that resonated with bigger audiences, and I suspect that's possibly what we refer to.
Yeah, I'm just being sensitive, and I understand that.
No, fair enough. No, that's why I want to explore it with you. It's just interesting to just talk through these things.
But hey, I love that she's being appreciated now in this film. Can we talk about the production? I love that this film is set in Hollywood, but shot entirely in Cannes in France.
Yeah, I love that, this psychogeography, the kind of geography of the mind. It is like this. It helps with the whole stylization, the distance effect. Like, I don't know enough about the light quality of Cannes versus what it's like in LA. I've been to LA a few times, and certainly it looks kind of like LA. It looks close enough that I'm going with it, but I suspect for people who perhaps know it much better, it might be a slightly disconcerting experience, but that's the whole point of it, isn't it? I love that. I love as well the fact that in Elizabeth Sparkle's flat, she has this beautiful penthouse flat with a huge floor-to-ceiling window that looks out over what I assume is Los Angeles, and they were looking at ways to achieve that. And at first, they thought it was going to be green screen. Then they were looking at one of these LED volumes, which is where you basically have a huge TV screen that wraps around the set and you project an image onto that, which they used in Megalopolis quite a bit. But in the end, they went with as traditional as it comes. They call it a translight. So basically, they just take a huge picture of somewhere and they blow it up onto a huge backdrop and they light it. So that was the technique that Alfred Hitchcock would use in most of his big feature films. So it evokes that era of classic Hollywood. You kind of, even if you don't know what's happening, your brain knows it's not real, but it looks beautiful.
Yeah. I love that because it was a small budget film, 17.5 mil. They didn't have much money, and therefore they weren't going to be able to shoot it in LA on location. And I love that out of a financial necessity, they choose to shoot in Cannes. And out of that, it fits the story because Coralie Farge talked about wanting this film to evoke like a fantasy of our, like you said, like psychogeography, our collective understanding of what Hollywood is. And so it's perfect to have a place that looks like it. It's got the palm trees, it has the sunshine, but it's not exactly, there aren't street signs that tell you you're in Los Angeles, and they didn't try and recreate those, They didn't try to make it exactly realistic, but you get this, it evokes a sense. And similarly, small budget film, they couldn't have a big cast and big crew. And again, it really fits with the story because this is a film about one woman's kind of mental breakdown, essentially. And she feels very isolated in herself. And because the film needed to be very isolated out of necessity, that kind of feeds into it and helps create that sense. So I love that. I feel like it's like an example of a bigger budget isn't necessarily a benefit to you, Like it can often, out of like necessity, you can often actually create the best version, the best outcome.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the kind of the tighter budget meant that everything has a slightly stripped back, minimal look. So there are quite big sets in here, but the sets they're quite minimalist. They're quite stylized, which again I think was an artistic choice, but it was also the fact that they don't have an unlimited budget. So they went for building scale. They didn't go for building detail. So you get very long corridors, very spacious rooms, but they're usually block colors. They're not overly ornate, and I think that's that mixture of kind of they can't afford to make elaborate sets, but also it kind of strips things back for the aesthetic of the film.
Yeah. But definitely all of that contributes to this sense of timelessness about the film, which Farge said that she wanted to evoke. And I love that because there's this interesting thing, almost similar to Promising Young Woman, where Demi Moore's costume in the film is very kind of classic Hollywood, like old school Hollywood style, with her big trench coat and her gloves But then on the other hand, Sue, Margaret Qualley's character, she's quite 80s. She's got this very 80s kind of style with her pink swimming costume that she wears for her workout classes and the sets that she's on. And I think that combination puts you in this timeless, out of time world.
Oh yeah, it's going to age very well, I think, the film, because of that. I think trying to build any timelessness into film is a great idea, and it's all over the substance. And another thing that when I was watching it, I was struck by how there were a lot of use of very stylized close-ups. And my initial reaction was like, that's a lot of work to film. So you'll often have characters, the one I'm immediately thinking of is Dennis Quaid's kind of TV exec character, and he's having what look like lobster or shrimp, I'm not quite sure. But he's kind of tearing his way through prawns. Thank you. He was tearing his way through that. But you get all of these very detailed close-ups and different angles, and he lights a cigarette, and you see the detail. And it's like, but they're really beautifully done. You can tell that time's been spent on that. The thing about that would usually be the second unit of a film. So you have your main, so Coralie Farge is your main unit director, your first director. But you'd have a second unit director, and they would film all of the close-ups and the inserts. They're a separate team, separate cameraman, separate AD, separate director, But you can tell that they're so specific that I just thought, no, she's directed her own second unit, and that rarely happens. The only main director I know who does that is Christopher Nolan. He directs all of his second and third and fourth units, and she's done the exact same thing. There is no second unit on her film, third unit. She figured out a way of having a very long shooting schedule. They shot over 108 days, which is a huge shooting schedule, but what she did is that a lot of it was with a really stripped down crew. So for exterior shots, they had 6 people in their crew, and then they got rid of most of the crew, and they just had like 2 people, her and a cinematographer, doing all of the insert shots and all those cutaways for like a couple of months, so they could spend ages on them. Because of course, when you're doing really close-ups, if it's the face, you might need to use the actor, but if it's body parts and arms and prosthetics, you don't need the main cast there. So you can spend ages lighting those angles and get them right. So that's what happened. And then when they were doing the prosthetics and studio work, then they got up to 200 cast members. So by basically being able to modulate how many crew and cast, she shot the film for quite a long amount of time. And it meant that she was able to direct every frame of the film. So she wasn't handing over to another director, it means that it all feels part of the same design.
Wow, so you're right. It truly is a very authored film. I love that. You can feel it. It's so
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, it's like completely consistent all the way through. Oh, and that shrimp scene is iconic. Like it just so disgusting. Like I think I flinched and looked away from him ripping off those shrimp heads
Yeah.
more than I did at any other moment in the film.
And it's made disgusting because you get absolutely the camera's right there. This is really quite.
Yeah,
a
you
quite
can even
tight
see his
macro.
coffee stains on his teeth. Like it's
Yeah.
gross.
They actually chose what lenses to shoot on based on getting really close-ups, because there's different types of lenses, and the lenses that they shot Promising Young Woman on, which are called anamorphics, which give you this kind of Hollywood widescreen, they didn't use it for the substance because you can't get in close enough with those lenses. That's one of the drawbacks, is that you can't physically get focus very close up. So they shot on spherical lenses, which allowed them to get really close, and then they put another device on the front of the lens that allowed them to get even closer still. So they deliberately chose their lenses for those moments so they could really get in close.
Amazing. So to close, can we just talk about the final scene? So yeah, sorry guys, spoilers, but we have to talk about it. So I understand that the different prosthetic creatures' costumes had nicknames. So when Demi Moore wakes up at a certain point in the film and she has aged dramatically since the last time, I think that was called Gollum, when she's pretty much bald and hunchbacked. But then the final monster, I think that it was called, wasn't it called like Monstro Elizu?
Eliasu, yeah.
And this, and I have to say, when this kind of final creature reveals itself, someone in the audience at the screening I saw literally screamed like, ah! Like,
oh my God, that's
it was so, I was like quite insulted. I was like, okay, like rude, like she's not that bad. She got help us.
It's a horror reaction.
I was like, that's so mean, especially because I then saw.
That's so mean to the horrific mutated, got a head coming out of the back. It's
shocking. It's shocking. I get it, but also Coralie Farge, she very deliberately, when they were designing this creature, wanted her to have heart, you know, for us to empathize and it be a sympathetic character. You know, she was really inspired by like the Elephant Man and the French version of the Hunchback of Notre Dame. So that was definitely there in the background. And I felt that, you know, I did feel a lot of sympathy for this. But it was like amazing because it's shocking, this creature, but also, I mean, so funny when she's putting on the earrings and trying to curl her hair before she goes to the final performance and sticks Demi Moore's face on her face. I was like,
it's a tragedy. It's a tragic
comedy,
it's a
horror,
tragic character. Yeah, no, it's really, I didn't expect it to go there with the getting ready to go out, but of course it's like a distorted echo of earlier in the film where Demi Moore can't go on a date.
Yeah, exactly. I hadn't even thought of that. And what did you make of the Kubrick references?
Oh, I mean, I loved it, obviously, being a Kubrick fanboy. I love the fact that it was a very film-aware film. It was happily quoting and riffing on different films, and I loved it.
Yeah.
You know,
because there's the moment when the monsters first emerges and we get a few bars of 2001's theme tune. Yeah. And then later on when the kind of the crescendo of the film is that the monster, we'll call it that. I feel a bit bad calling it that, but Margaret Qualley's mutated version of herself goes on stage and the audience take umbrage at that, scream at her and then attack her. And she's kind of deteriorating. And as she does, just this like, she just spews blood everywhere. It's like a tsunami of blood everywhere. And then as she turns, she kind of has to run and goes down the corridor. And it's just like in The Shining, right? This like tsunami of blood down these long empty corridors.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I have to say, I was laughing the whole time. It was so funny. I loved it. I thought it was such a perfect ending to this film.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. That's where it needed to go, I think. Absolutely.
And then the very final scene is definitely a nod to Death Becomes Her.
Oh, I've not seen Death Becomes Her, but
oh my God, you have got anyone who loved The Substance, and I'm looking at you, James, you have got to see Death Becomes Her. It's one of my favorite movies. It's a movie from the 80s with Bruce Willis, Meryl Streep, and Goldie Hawn. And it's amazing because Bruce Willis is cast completely against type. He's playing this awkward, nerdy scientist guy who's very beta. It's fantastic. And Meryl Streep and Goldie Hawn are these glamorous kind of Hollywood type stars who are competing against each other, always have. And it takes this kind of body horror turn. And yeah, the final scene is definitely a nod, an homage to the final scene of Death Becomes Her. And I loved that. I found it because there was this moment during the kind of final horrific change, there was this like flashing light that kept coming in that looked like the light from the hospital where Demi Moore's character kind of started this whole story. And I was really scared that it was going to be like she woke up and it was all a dream. Because do you remember the car accident that gets her to the hospital is so horrific. It's insane that she was fine. So I was like, oh God, no. But they like totally like, it was like a kind of a double crossing because it was fine. There wasn't anything like that. We got the fully satisfying ending that we were hoping for. It was brilliant.
Oh, absolutely. And I did love the ending, actually, the very last sequence, beautifully arced back to the very beginning of the film. And it was the perfect ending to the film.
Yeah. And again, done pretty much all in camera, very little CGI. Love that.
Yeah, absolutely. No. Beautifully finished.
All right, so that concludes our first episode of the new series. Thanks so much for listening.
Absolutely. Thank you again for listening. And if you could find your way to leaving us a like or a good review, it all helps get the podcast out into the world.
So we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Groovy Movies is produced and edited by us, Lily Austin and James Brailsford. And James also produced the theme music.
Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Groovy Movies Pod or email us groovymoviespod@gmail.com.
For more information about the films discussed, check out the show notes.